now return to the Transformers.
On that subject, it's time we move on to the final entry in this series, Power of the Primes. Don't worry, this one was made while its corresponding toy line was still on the shelves. That's an improvement. So with the Fallen having shown himself, Megatron leads Windblade, Perceptor, and Victorion on a quest to find the ancient Requiem Blaster. All the while, Overlord and Rodimus Kron are following Megatron's trail. It's like a Looney Tunes chase scene, only with more murder. Something that's always a nice treat, however, is the appearance of the Dinobots, with Grimlock's original cartoon voice actor Greg Berger returning to reprise the role.
Are we there yet?
No. For the 418th time. Stop asking, Grimlock.
Are we there yet?
No!
Are we there yet?
Smoke 'em if you got 'em, people. It's Dinobot approved. Anyway, he's basically the same character as the Grimlock of the original series, and you might remember I have a new appreciation for the character after rewatching that. One thing that has changed is that the Dinobots are now a combiner team. Of course they are. And for the first time in this trilogy, we see an on-screen combination sequence, as the 5 of them all combine into Volcanicus. Sure, his size fluctuates wildly during this scene. Fellow combiner Victorion is no match for him. Is anyone else noticing a pattern with Victorion? The slow animation takes some of the excitement out of the scene, not to mention the addition of Predaking. The sequence feels like they're padding out the show's runtime, but, for what it's worth, this is a better fight scene than what we got in Combiner Wars and Titans Return. It's also an overall more successful attempt at a Dinobot combiner than the first time someone tried this. Transformers fans who know about it really don't like to talk about the Beast. I feel like I'm damning the series with faint praise by saying that, but either way, Grimlock joins our heroes on their quest, as does the Requiem Blaster's guardian, Optimus Primal.
Who gave you the job of protecting the Requiem Blaster?
I'm not sure. For as long as I can remember, I've protected it. I've known no other life.
Hi, Ron Perlman. I admit I'm used to Gary Chalk, especially since he's also played Optimus Prime for almost as long as he played Primal, and at the end of the day, I'm still not sure how I feel about this version of the character. He's stoic, and that's about it. There's a conflict between him and Megatron over whether or not it's safe to use the Requiem Blaster, but when Overlord attacks the crew and Rodimus pulls Victorion's head off, it becomes, let's say, necessary. It says something about how much of a threat Overlord is when a weapon that causes this much damage is needed to stop him.
King Kong ain't got shit on me!
The Requiem Blaster has come a long way since Armada. Think, I was knocking Combiner Wars over not showing on-screen carnage. Now here comes Overlord and Rodimus Kron, characters with actual body counts. The scene where they torture the other 4 Dinobots for info, and then Rodimus kills Sludge anyway, is probably the most heart-wrenching scene in the trilogy. Well, I say Rodimus is the one who kills Sludge, but he's not really the one in the driver's seat. Guess who's back, everyone?
Unicron is always present.
Yes, he is, and his presence in this series makes the Fallen seem like kind of an idiot. See, this Fallen takes cues from the backstory provided by Covenant of Primus, so rather than betray the other original Transformers and join Unicron, he and the others fought together against the Chaos Bringer. Indeed, he boasts having personally fired the Requiem Blaster that led to Unicron's defeat in this continuity. It was accidentally killing Solus Prime that made Megatronus the Fallen, bringing her back to life turning out to be the Fallen's motivation here in Power of the Primes, using the Matrix, the Enigma, and the Blaster to drain the life out of all Cybertronians in existence to do it. So the decision to give the Matrix of Chaos to Overlord so Hot Rod could start working for him is a questionable one, as during the final battle, Unicron further alters Hot Rod's body, now looking even more like his shattered glass self thanks to the goatee, and tries to destroy the Matrix, meaning the Fallen basically self-sabotaged himself by giving his old enemy a chance to get involved.
Primus knows why.
In fact, despite being played by Mark Hamill, who is using his Skeleton King voice to make the Fallen seem appropriately menacing, there's something else undermining the Fallen's character. See, no matter how good someone's performance is, if their facial animation is nothing but
dull surprise?
Yes,
Dull surprise, dull surprise, dull surprise, dull surprise, dull surprise. Boy, I'm really making up the points. Dull surprise, dull surprise, we'll be right back. Dull surprise,
then we got a problem. He's motivated by the loss of a loved one, but it's hard to really convey real emotion on his face. And that's a shame because this is easily the most emotionally driven version of the Fallen. Keep in mind that unlike most other versions of this particular backstory, there's no Liege Maximo manipulating Megatronus, being the Palpatine to Megatronus' Darth Vader, and setting events into motion that would lead to Solus's death. Here in Power of the Primes, this appears to have been a genuine accident. Now there's a lot of moving parts to this ending, and where things start to unravel as all the animation and audio problems start to converge. Characters flail around in an attempt to make it look like they're struggling with each other. Sound effects don't have the impact you'd expect from particularly powerful attacks. Ron Perlman sounds like he's whispering half the time, so it's hard to understand what Optimus Primal is saying. And as far as the pacing is concerned, it jumps around a lot between dealing with the Fallen and Unicron, and I can't say either is resolved in a satisfying way. The Fallen gets dragged into the afterlife by Solus, while the Matrix of Chaos is forced out of Hot Rod's chest, at which point it ends up in Megatron's hands. Then Primal points the Requiem blaster at him. They literally just saved Hot Rod from this fate, and I cannot fathom why it would be irreversible if the Matrix of Chaos ended up possessing Megatron. But apparently Megatron and even Hot Rod agree that Primal is making the right decision here, leaving this ending with a bad taste in my mouth. I can't believe I'm about to say this given he's been the main villain of this franchise for decades, but Megatron did not need to die. Oh, but we do get Optimus Prime back at the last minute. Yay. I'm getting the strong feeling that nobody really knew what they wanted with this series. Well, okay, what Hasbro wanted was to promote the newest toys. In fact, that's one aspect that's unique to Transformers. How successful is this trilogy as a toy commercial? Let's see. Combiner Wars puts the actual combiners in the background and doesn't do a good job explaining how they work in universe. In fact, the toy line doesn't even limit the combining to just the classic combiner teams. Every character can combine into a new gestalt. Guess how many non-combiner teams combine in this series? Well, other than the Dinobots 2 toy lines later, none. Titan's Return bothers giving the Titans screen time, but the Titan Master gimmick that effectively turns every character into a headmaster? Well, I mean, you got Emissary, who's the only one who shows up, bonded to Fortress Maximus, but is never seen on-screen turning into Cerebros' head, who just doesn't show up at all, even though he's supposed to be the head of Fortress Maximus. What? And then there's Power of the Primes, which puts more emphasis on the artifacts our heroes and villains are fighting over, which is not part of the toy line. Optimus Primal just kinda shows up, gets a hold of the Matrix of Leadership, which happens to give him his optimal body from Beast Wars 3rd season, which feels less like the culmination of a hero's journey and more like just something that had to happen to make the Beast Wars fans excited, I guess. Perhaps the biggest example of this series failing to sell its products, though, is Victorion. Like I said, she too was part of the fan-built bot that created Windblade, specifically for Combiner Wars. Yet in that series, she just suddenly shows up out of nowhere during the climax, and then does nothing. Then in Titan's Return, she leads the other Combiners during their subplot, and ultimately fails to stop Trypticon. If anything, she makes the situation worse after Trypticon eats her. And then in Power of the Primes, she's at odds with Megatron over who's in charge of the team, proves herself inept at handling the Dinobots and Predaking, and is then casually killed off by Unicron. It's even acknowledged after her death that even she knew that Megatron was the true leader of their dysfunctional crew, not her. All the while showing my point about this depiction of combiners, basically ignoring the component characters as characters, results in Victorion narratively being treated as just a slightly larger Transformer, making the fact that she is a combiner irrelevant. Good job showing off your brand new character, Hasbro. Now, I had originally written a line about how Victorion alone proves that Transformers has not gone woke, but considering the anti-SJWs are now blowing up about Mr. Potato Head of all things, never mind. They'll still probably call this SJW propaganda even after what I just got finished talking about. And what about Windblade, the so-called main character of this series who I barely talked about over the course of Power of the Primes? Well, if there's any good news, it's that she's become less kill-crazy over the course of this series, and by now she's actually trying to reach out to other cast members, encouraging Primal to find a new purpose in life, and being the most vocal about wanting to save Hot Rod. In fact, Windblade's the primary reason why I feel like what happened to Hot Rod in this series isn't a matter of fans being bitter. As frankly as we had gone the Deviations route, she would show no concern about Hot Rod, and the series would have ended with Primal pointing the blaster at him, which would have been an even worse way to end things. So, thank you, Windblade, for stopping this from being so fan-wanky. Really, Power of the Prime's character dynamics is focused more on the rest of the crew learning to trust Megatron. Windblade's in more of a supporting role this time as a result. I honestly can't decide if that's a good thing or not. She's got more to do than Perceptor and Grimlock, who at the end of the day feel more like they're just along for the ride, so I guess Windblade's got that going for her. If nothing else, the Prime Wars Trilogy was an interesting experiment. The thing about the Generations toy line that all three sublines are part of is that it's not necessarily aimed at the same audience as most mainstream Transformers media. That is to say, kids in the 10 to 12 age range. Generations instead aims at older collectors. Unsurprisingly, that means that the three web series are also aimed at the same demographic. Also unsurprisingly, that audience found this series underwhelming. I've even heard some people say it's as bad as Energon. I don't know about that. It does have a lot of the same problems, mostly in terms of animation, voice acting, and plotting. I am going to go out on a limb here and say the audio issues are worse than Energon, but for the rest, I'm not really convinced. It's a shorter series for one thing, so I don't have to put up with it as long. More importantly, however, I can take some solace in knowing that some concepts in this series will get new and improved versions of that same story or character in a later Transformers series. We've seen it ourselves in my past videos. For example, I could care less about Guile Dart and Arcadis' feud in Beast Wars Neo, but the writers of that same show went on to write for Car Robots, which was dubbed into English as Robots in Disguise, giving us the more engaging Skybite and Scourge rivalry. Speaking of Robots in Disguise, I similarly do not care about Koji feeling bad about his father getting kidnapped. But when that happens to Sari Sundak from Transformers Animated, then I'm invested in how it affects her. Hopefully you see where I'm going with this. The Prime Wars Trilogy isn't very good, but I wouldn't mind, say, seeing a better written version of Hot Rod discarding the Autobot Matrix only to get possessed by a very different Matrix that comes from Unicron, as that has some potential. That could make for an interesting story in a later series. I am mixed about Overlord's voice, but this characterization is fine for a later series, which American media has fully embraced. There's also Windblade's place in Transformers. What started here in this series was only the beginning. For better or worse, whether it's both IDW continuities, 2015's Robots in Disguise, Cyberverse, or even this series, Windblade's going to be part of the primary cast in most series going forward. And given how much praise this version of Megatron has gotten, often called the only good thing about this trilogy by fans, there's no doubt in my mind that we'll be getting a Megatron down the line that's characterized in a similar way. Honestly, after having been very critical of this series, I feel good ending on a hopeful note. This is what I'm hoping my channel will be more like going forward, seeing what went right and what went wrong, and what we can ultimately get out of it. I feel like these videos get more accomplished this way. And maybe you'll get more out of that than the simple recaps with some light commentary along the way that I've done in the past. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you again